Good evening. This is the I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm Lucy Arish, and these are the headlines. Criticism and warnings from inside the United States intelligence community towards the U.S. policy on Syria. An exchange of words between Iran and the U.S. Iran's foreign minister says that the country's technology is non-negotiable concerning the closure of the nuclear plants in Fordow and Iraq. And the Israeli government forced to explain its plans on the controversial separation barrier. I-24 News speaks to one of the groups leading the fight against the barrier. Good evening again. U.S. intelligence chiefs testified in front of the House Intelligence Committee in Washington and sharply criticized the Obama administration's policy on Syria. Meanwhile, the Syrian Air Force continues its airstrikes in the city of Aleppo. I-24 News reporter Owen Shapiro has more.
A day after John Kerry was quoted by congressmen saying he thinks his administration has failed to deal with the situation in Syria, more and more similar voices are being heard from Washington's top officials.
In your professional opinion,
Yesterday, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Roger slammed Obama's policy and described it as a complete failure.
This lack of leadership has created growing risk aversion within our intelligence agencies. As al-Qaeda has morphed and spread throughout Yemen, Syria, the Levant, and Africa, we have piled on here in Washington, D.C., even more bureaucracy on our intelligence agencies.
Even the destruction of chemical weapons, considered as a great diplomatic achievement of the international community, is now getting cold water thrown on it. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper suggests this action actually strengthens Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
If he doesn't go, in the absence of some kind of a diplomatic agreement ensuing from Geneva or follow-on discussions, I would foresee kind of more of the same, sort of a perpetual state of stalemate where neither the regime nor the opposition can prevail.
As the debate in Washington continues, Syria is still bleeding, torn, and divided. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry defined the recent barrel bombing in the city of Aleppo as the last barbaric act of the Syrian regime. More than 150 people were killed over the last few days from airstrikes in the region. With so many problems in and outside of the region, Americans are still searching reconciliation, perhaps not only in Syria, but within the Obama administration.
Yes, and with me on set now is Colonel Richard Camp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Good evening. It's a pleasure having you again in the studio. So we saw the criticism that John Kerry had on the Burrell bombings. What is this Burrell bombings? Is it a new method of fighting?
Well, it's a very much a homemade weapon, an improvised explosive device, if you like, which essentially is up to maybe 3,500 pounds of explosives, sometimes less, packed into a metal container like an oil barrel or some other form of container, and then detonator added and literally just dropped out of a helicopter. Now, these are not guided weapons in any way at all, and when they're dropped onto urban areas, of course, they can land anywhere, they can wreak destruction, they can kill, and they do kill men, women and children without any discrimination between people who are combatants and non-combatants.
Are we going back to World War II?
Well, I think we had much more advanced weaponry in World War II than this. And I think that the Syrians are still using advanced weaponry supplied from Russia, and there's still plenty of conventional weaponry available to them. I think this is just an adjunct to what they're trying to do. They're just trying to use all of the resources they've got, their helicopters, everything they can, to pile pressure and kill people.
What is the military effect? Is it something that we can see in some other places? Where did they take this example from?
Well, it's a very basic bomb which has been used, as you mentioned, the kind of thing that we used in the Second World War, even going back probably more likely the First World War. But this is normally the kind of munition that's resorted to by terrorists, like, for example, Hezbollah or like the Taliban in Afghanistan, the improvised explosive devices. And of course, Iran itself, I'm not saying Iran is directly behind these particular attacks. But Iran has a big hand to play in this latest, in all of the series of war crimes that have been carried out against their own population by the Syrian government.
Yes, I want to pass to the subject of drones. The annual military balance report was released today from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Among the many conclusions, the cost of drones is falling and they will be used increasingly in warfare and surveillance. At the launch of the London conference, aerospace expert Doug Barry said that the technology will improve and the use will spread and that more ethical and legal questions will follow. I'm going to ask the very basic question. What is the problems exactly with drones?
Well, I don't think there is a problem with drones. I think there's a problem with all weapons of war. They have to be used within a legal framework. And if drones are used in accordance with the Geneva Convention, which they can be, and I think in many cases, particularly the drones used by the United States, Great Britain, Israel and other countries are used in accordance with those laws, then to my mind, there's nothing wrong with them. In many ways, they're better than other weapon systems because they have the ability to be more precisely targeted. They have the ability, particularly if you're fighting the kind of enemy that Israel fights, for example, in Gaza, the kind of enemy that Britain and America fight in Afghanistan. People who fight in among the civilian population, who are using civilians as human shields, then it's more possible to attack the actual fighters and destroy the fighters and their weapons using a drone which can loiter for a long time, which can be more precisely targeted than many other kinds of munitions.
So how do you fight exactly the legal aspect of the subject?
Well, I think you have to really get your head around it, and you have to make sure that there is a legal framework in place in the country that's using the drones, as there is, of course, both in the United States, in Israel, in the United Kingdom and other countries that use them. Then you have to have that legal framework. It has to be adapted specifically for the use of drones, and it has to be rigidly enforced. And if it's not, then, of course, that leaves the way open for other less scrupulous countries who will in due course and are acquiring drones to use them in a way that's illegal. So I think, we Western powers like the US, UK and Israel have to set the example and have to have the highest possible standards in use of the weapon systems.
Yeah, Colonel Richard Camp, it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you very much for this. And we're moving to Iran. Iran's opening to the West following its interim nuclear deal. Over 100 French businessmen are visiting the Islamic Republic this week as part of a move to resume trade ties with Tehran. French car and aviation companies are thought to be close to striking agreements already. At the same time, a sort of exchange of words between the U.S. and Iran after U.S. Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman said that the U.S. doesn't think the Arak and Fordow facilities should remain. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif responded today that the declarations are irrelevant and Iran's technology is non-negotiable. And to look more at this subject, joining me right now is Meir Javed Anfar, Iranian politics expert at the IDC here at Talia. Thank you very much for coming to the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we started by saying that there's a meeting between businessmen, French businessmen, and the Iranian. They started with Turkey. They're moving to France. Who's the next goal?
But I think the Iranians are basically trying to improve their leverage at the negotiations by luring as many businessmen to come to their country. Their hope is that once these businessmen come to Iran and look at the business opportunities, they go back to their own countries, they start pressuring their governments to take a softer stance on Iran. And this is worrying. And I think where they're going to hit a brick wall, and I think they will hit a brick wall, is that the Americans are not going to go easy on the sanctions, no matter what's dangled in front of the French businessmen.
Although we're seeing that about the Fordow and Arak, Javad Zarif is saying firmly that we're not going to be easy on this subject.
I don't think there's anybody who expects a reasonable solution who believes that Fordow and Arak can stay open as part of a final agreement. Fordow was born out of wedlock, if you want to put it that way, legally. Iran did not declare it on time. It was a secret site that was revealed, and it's deep inside a mountain. If you don't want to make a weapon, why do you need an enrichment site deep inside a mountain? You've got nothing to worry about. So if they wanted to stay open, is a source of concern. And Iraq basically is going to run on heavy water, which you can extract plutonium to make a weapon. It's a no-go. I think the Iranians are basically, it's their starting position, but what they say is not always, that's not the final line. We've seen that, for example, before they said there'll be no cessation of 20% enrichment, they're doing it now.
Meir, I have to say that it doesn't smell good.
Well, look, everybody takes a maximalist position in the talks. You know, it's like we in Israel say Iran has no enrichment right whatsoever. They should just put everything in a box, pack it, and send it abroad, FedEx it abroad. And, you know, to them, that's also, but, you know, it's a starting position. In negotiations, you don't start at your ending point. You usually start a little bit further away. So by the time you've bargained everything down, but there is a red line. The red line is no Fordo, no Iraq, and nobody is going to accept an Iran that's not severely under inspections.
So where is Iran's red line?
Iran's red line, I think, is enrichment. I think it's, you know, in Iran, the concept of haq, the right, is very important. It's kind of the part of the psyche. It comes from the national trauma. We have to recognize their right to enrichment. And if we can agree to, you know, the sensitive sites of Iraq and Fordo being closed and inspections, then they can have perhaps 2,000 centrifuges on their soil enriching uranium, that they could also say to their own people that we have secured our right to enrich uranium on our own soil.
So it started in the UN Assembly, then it moved to the United States, then it moves to Turkey, now it's France. Who's next in line?
It's difficult to know. I think what's worrying everybody is that the Iranians and the Russians are going to do a deal where the Russians are going to take Iran's oil, not pay them, but in return give them Russian equipment and Russian goods. Now, there's a good and a bad thing. The bad thing is that yes, Iran will be able to get something in return for its oil, which is something we don't want. The good thing, which I don't know if it's nice to say, is that the Iranians are going to get a bunch of Russian junk. And I'm quoting what Iranian engineers say. So when the Russians can sell their junk to Iran that nobody else wants to buy, why will they want the sanctions removed?
And you will be here to answer the question, I believe, in the next few days, in the next few weeks, and in the next few months.
Thank you.
Meir Javedanfar, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Israel's controversial separation barrier was again in the spotlight this week when the High Court of Justice called on the government to explain a planned route through two Palestinian villages. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblizer reports from the West Bank.
Behind me stands one of the most controversial structures in Israel, and for that matter, the entire world. It has been called everything from a security fence to a separation barrier to an apartheid wall. And by April the 10th, the Israeli government will finally have to differentiate between these terms by justifying its chosen construction route. Here in the Palestinian town of Beit Jala, the focus is a recent petition to the High Court of Justice, demanding that the Israeli government forego building a portion of the barrier that would divide this community and isolate many residents from their fields.
It will divide the city from any future extension, and that means any future for our community if they build it as they want. And they will separate two convents from each other, the Silesian fathers and the Silesian sisters.
The land in question is a valley between the sprawling settlement of Gilo and that of nearby Har Gilo. Many accuse Israel of adopting a construction path that will ensure that the two Jewish towns can ultimately be connected. On Monday, the High Court called on the government to explain its decision not to examine additional routes. Israel began building the barrier in 2002 at the height of the Second Palestinian Intifada. The government has always described the initiative as a security imperative. But if completed as planned, the barrier will bring upwards of 10% of the West Bank under Israeli control. Many thus question its legality. It is here in the West Bank village of Walaja that the core issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict converge. On the one hand, there's the humanitarian side. The structure was built literally through the city, dissecting it in half and dividing the local residents from their agricultural resources. On the other hand is the need to maintain security. Literally, across the fence is the Jewish settlement of Har Gilo. It really is a matter of perspective.
This wall is make our life very hard. Why? Because it's goes around the houses and separated the most of our land after it.
In many ways, the separation barrier is the ultimate conundrum. Its security benefits to Israel are seemingly undeniable. Likewise, the fact that such benefits come at the expense of the Palestinians. Perhaps then, the fundamental question being asked of the Israeli Supreme Court is this: does security trump humanity?
And to another decision of the Israeli High Court, an unprecedented ruling of the Israeli High Court now prohibits any state payments to thousands of ultra-Orthodox students who delay their drafting into military service. Is it the beginning of renewed clashes between the country's secular and religious camps? I-24 News correspondent Shahar Pellet reports.
The High Court of Justice versus the Israeli government. Equality in military service has been an issue of ongoing debate in Israel, in which most of the Orthodox community does not take part in army or national service. Now, angered voices are being heard in the ultra-Orthodox community after a dramatic interim injunction was issued against the state, forbidding funding of religious students who delay their draft date.
The ultra-Orthodox public feels very bad with the decision. There's no faith in the High Court, and instead of showing for once that it's a just judge, in the meantime it's not doing it.
This is the first time the High Court has decisively intervened on the controversial issue of ultra-Orthodox enlistment, applying to approximately 3,000 yeshiva students aged 18 to 20 who haven't reported at the Army's recruitment center. Backing the court's decision is Finance Minister Yair Lapid, who stated, quote, "It's a shame that the courts need to remind our government to uphold its own laws."
What the High Court did yesterday is to support what we were saying the entire time. We need to end the issue of birth inequality, and this is why there is a government without the Orthodox parties. This is what we were saying from day one. It's an open wound in the heart of the Israeli society, and it's time to end it.
Following the footsteps of his late father, a parliament member who back in 2003 won 15 seats and pushed the Orthodox parties out of the government, Lapid added that his ministry would halt the payment of the stipends to the students in question in accordance with the High Court injunction. On the other side of the coalition, Economy Minister Naftali Bennett said that it is not the High Court's place to meddle in the parliament's affairs, and that it made the task of integrating ultra-religious men into the army more difficult. The stalled legislation has created a growing drive to enlist ultra-Orthodox men in the secular majority, who feel their exclusive carrying of the military service burden must finally come to an end.
And now it's the UN versus the Vatican. I-24 News reporter Uli Shapira looks at the controversy of the Holy See.
For years, child abuse in the Catholic Church was swept under the carpet. But the UN Committee of the Rights of the Child broke the code of silence Wednesday. The scathing reports blames the Holy See for allowing thousands of cases of child abuse, demands to turn in sexual abusers immediately, and ask for full access to the Vatican's reports on the issue.
The main finding of the committee was that the Holy See has adopted policies and practices which have led to the continuation of the abuse by and the impunity of the perpetrators. The Holy See has consistently placed the preservation of the reputation of the Church and the protection of the perpetrators above children's best interests.
Ever since Pope Francis was elected last year, new spirits of openness and tolerance are coming from the Vatican. Several of the Catholics who were in the general audience said they agreed with the hard-hitting UN report and made a call to bring all accused offenders to justice.
Of course, you can punish them and send them to jail, but that wouldn't help in a Christian way. So that is the most difficult part, to forgive them.
The UN report followed a landmark hearing last month in which 18 independent human rights experts grilled the churchman and called for international investigation on the subject. It is too early to see how this report will affect the Catholic Church, but it does signal a clear message against child offenders. Darkness, as it says in the Gospel of John, cannot overcome the light.
And for more news, stay tuned. We're out for a 2 minutes break. 2 minutes, and I'll be back again. Welcome back. And for the first time today, Russia paraded the Olympic torch through Sochi less than 2 days before the opening of the Winter Games. Russian President Vladimir Putin was also set to visit athletes settling into the Olympic villages. The $50 billion project has long been overshadowed by Russia's law outlawing gay propaganda to minors and by security concerns, of course. One prominent terror group, Imarat Kavkaz, has announced its intent to carry out attacks, and the security fears are focused both outside of the game venues and in the Sochi area. And joining me right now from Sochi is our 24 News correspondent Ilan Goen. Good evening, Ilan.
Good evening, Lucy.
So you just landed in Sochi and the world is speaking about that. The town became a close security compound. Could you feel it?
I have to tell you, coming from the Middle East, from Israel originally, I've never felt so safe in my life. I mean, in terms of security, I have never seen anything like it. We're talking about anti-aircraft batteries with missiles. We've seen some warships in the sea just opposite the port here. One of the ships, by the way, is carrying all sorts of weird antennas, and it is described by the Russian media as a scientific ship, whatever that means. We've seen lots and lots of soldiers, plainclothes policemen, detectives. There are drones buzzing ahead of us in the air. And on the ground, there's just policemen everywhere. Sochi is probably the safest place in Russia and maybe one in the world today. On the other hand, as you've mentioned, there is this security threat. And we've heard from the Americans today that they think there are specific threats to the games. There's a lot of tension surrounding this safe compound, this ring of steel, as the Russian President Vladimir Putin described it.
So it seems that Vladimir Putin is not going to give up to all the threats that he's getting.
Oh, not at all. This is not only his pet project. This is a Russian project that so much was poured into this, so many resources, so much money, so many hours, man hours. There are 25,000 volunteers here. Russia wants to showcase its beautiful, self-confident, modern, successful face of the world, and it's doing everything it can to do that and to achieve that goal. But I have to say, even though we're seeing some gleaming, beautiful venues, actually from the window of my hotel where I'm staying right now, on one hand, on the other hand, we still see pretty big mountains or mounds of mud everywhere. There's lots of stray dogs. Some of the roads are not finished. Definitely the hotels and the media hotels, the work has not been done on them. It's a very mixed kind of feeling when you walk around the city. On one hand, amazing projects that were completed in record time. On the other hand, we still see workers. As we speak, I still see people trying to put up the finishing touches on buildings, and the chickens and dogs roaming the main streets. It's a very weird experience.
Ilan, if we're putting all the disputes aside, the security and the culture and the gay laws, how are the athletes taking all of this under the consideration?
Well, actually, I've traveled here with a few foreign athletes from different countries. In terms of the facilities, the venues themselves, it seems that they're top-notch. I mean, in terms of the standards, everything should be working fine in 2 days' time. But there are a lot of people who came here with very, say, negative expectations. And I think this is an opportunity, but also a huge challenge for the Russians to try and show the world that they're friendly, open, safe, successful, all this at the same time, and all this can achieve all this in 2 weeks. Not an easy task.
Yes, Ilan. Ilan Goren from Sochi Live. You're going to update us a lot in the next few days. Thank you very much for this phone call in the meantime. And the Winter Games are less than 2 days away. Sochi's $50 billion Olympic makeover comes after years of construction work in and around the city, and many residents in the region say they're paying the price for the Games.
The tiny village of Akshtir lies in the Caucasus Mountains, some 40 kilometers outside Sochi. A brand new road and railway line links it to the alpine resort of Krasnaya Polyana, where Olympic skiing events are taking place. But Akshtir's 150 residents aren't in the mood for celebrating the Winter Games. When major Olympic construction works began in 2009, their harsh living conditions worsened. Grigory and his family could only access drinking water via a well, and they say that was destroyed when the bulldozers moved in.
We're now using this water for doing the washing and that sort of thing, because we can no longer drink it. Look, it's mixed with soil. It used to be really clear, pure spring water.
Grigory now relies on a twice-weekly cistern delivery for his drinking water. The authorities in Akshtир don't seem to appreciate journalists visiting, the cameras quickly attracting police attention.
Where are you from? What are you doing here? Are you filming the village?
Alexandra also lives in the village. He says the Olympics have lost him his livelihood. Before construction work began in 2007, he used to sell fruits he grew in his garden. But his land alongside the railway track falls in an area now classed as a national park and has been confiscated. He can't get his kiwis to grow in the small section he has left.
When the work started for the Olympics, there was dust and dirt everywhere. Can you see what it's like? All that there comes from the Olympics construction. I can't sell my fruit anymore. I can't do anything. It was my livelihood.
Residents complain only a couple of families have received compensation from the authorities, who finance certain clear-up operations, such as concreting the main village road.
I've lost my land because of the Olympics. Do you think I'm happy about these games? I'm speaking out now because I hope Vladimir Putin will hear my message and realize what kind of government workers were in charge of this project.
Living off €200 his son gives him each month, Alexandra hopes one day he'll receive compensation. He dreams of using the money to build a new life elsewhere.
And massive clouds of black smoke hovered over a blaze in Russia after a train carrying fuel tanks derailed in the city of Kirov early today. Amateur video captured 12 tanks that caught on fire after the train went off rail. Over 300 firefighters and emergency workers were sent to extinguish the blaze, and some 400 people evacuated from the area. North and South Korea have agreed on the dates to hold reunions between families separated by the 1950 and 1953 Korean War, the first in several months. But with U.S. and South Korean forces due to begin large-scale military exercises later this month, many are wondering just how long this new friendliness will last.
North and South Korean families long separated during the Korean War will reunite, but only for a brief period of 6 days during this month in the Mount Kumgang resort north of the border.
First of all, South and North Korea have agreed to hold reunions of the separated families at Mount Kumgang from February the 20th to the 25th, after the Lunar New Year.
But this may not be. Officially, North Korea has not yet linked any possible agreement on the family reunions. Any kind of agreement between the two rivals is rare, and in the past, North Korea has withdrawn permission for the event at the last minute. Casting a shadow over the long-awaited gathering is Pyongyang's wariness of planned war exercises between Seoul and the United States.
Regarding the fact that the agreement last year had not been fulfilled, we have delivered a message of our stance, that it should not happen again, and the North side has agreed on this.
The war left millions of families divided, with private travel across the border and communication, including phone calls, banned. More than 70,000 South Koreans have been seeking to meet lost family members at these rare and fleeting moments of compromise between North and South Korea.
And in just the first months of the year, some 400 dolphins have died off the coast of Peru, and many have washed up dead on the shores, putting beaches at risk of contamination. Scientists are as yet unable to determine what is exactly the reason that kills them. Yes. And the Fatah movement has been persecuted in the Gaza Strip since Hamas took over in 2007. But in recent months, there are signs of reconciliation. And one of them is mass wedding held by the Fatah movement in the Gaza Strip on Tuesday, marrying 80 couples in a service paid for by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. More from I-24 News correspondent Gabi Weiningeber.
A cause for celebration in Gaza as Palestinian brides prepare to wed, singing national songs and waving yellow Fatah flags at a seaside resort.
I give my joy as a gift to all the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza. Of course, this is a joy for all the Palestinian people on the occasion of a mass wedding held by the Fatah movement.
Palestinians are politically divided between Mahmoud Abbas's West Bank-based Fatah movement and the militant Islamist Hamas in Gaza. Tensions between the two escalated in June 2007, resulting in Hamas's total control of the Gaza Strip. But on Tuesday, the two joined forces for a second time in under a week. All wedding expenses were billed straight to the Palestinian Authority.
Nearly 80 brides and grooms, and the whole festival has been funded and supported by the President Mahmoud Abbas.
Previously, Palestinian mass weddings have been the domain of Hamas. In the past 3 years, there have been 25 mass weddings in the Gaza Strip, either organized by Hamas or by its smaller rival, the Islamic Jihad.
This is a great joy for all the grooms and for all the Palestinian people. It's the joy of the nation. Thank you to everyone.
But with the brides in traditional embroidered Palestinian dresses and the grooms attired in Western suits, the wedding presented a rare occasion where couples could forget their divisions, even if just for a while.
Yes, Mabruk, we say. 9 South African gold miners remain unaccounted for following a fire at a depth of 1,700 meters as the country's miners strike for higher wages. The I-24 News Economy magazine on Africa's biggest economy.
A major South African mining strike is on the cusp of entering its third week as Cape Town hosts Africa's largest mining conference. Around 80,000 platinum miners began striking to demand a living wage of 12,500 rand per month, which is just over $1,100 US.
We are concerned with apartheid. We are still concerned about this queue economy that favors the few. So therefore, the economy becoming so important when the workers, who are the citizens of the country, should benefit from their forefathers' wealth. And then, but when these CEOs are paid these 20 millions, 40 millions, the economy is quiet. The economists are not making noise about that.
The strike, which has hit the world's 3 largest platinum mines, has ground South Africa's mining industry to a halt. It's a major blow for a country with the largest known reserves of platinum and chrome, and which relies on metal exports for more than 50% of its foreign exchange earnings. Though analysts suggest that Nigeria could catch up in the next 5 years, South Africa represents about 20% of the entire continent's GDP, so the situation could have dire consequences for the country and the continent.
Is just looking at the importance of the mining sector. If we have to say, what is it relative to the economy? It's less than 10% of the GDP of the country, but it's over 50% of South Africa's exports. And as we're running a trade account deficit, rippling through to a current account deficit, it's having a very negative impact on the rand exchange rate and inflation.
The companies say that the demanded wage raise would double the current minimum wage and make doing business untenable at current prices. This, they claim, could lead companies to turn to more automation of the workforce, leaving thousands unemployed. The current unemployment rate is 24.7% in South Africa. Meanwhile, the mining industry has reportedly contracted by an average of 1% annually, inflation adjusted between 2001 and 2008. It is clear that the current situation is not good for business.
Obviously, we do have strikes in the platinum mining sector at the moment. We estimate that these are costing the mining industry about 197 million rand a day. So it is affecting the industry quite significantly. A lot of work is underway at the moment to help resolve the strikes.
Workers rejected an offer to raise pay by 9% last week. The continuing unrest, coupled with rising costs and ambiguity regarding policy, are causing a potential powerhouse to fall behind.
And if we're talking about economy, with me now on set to look at the week in economy is our host in the Economy magazine. Hello, Benjamin.
How's it going?
How are you?
Pretty good.
So it's a big week for the new CEO of Microsoft.
It's a very big week for everybody at Microsoft.
For everybody's Microsoft.
Indeed.
So what are the challenges that he's going to face?
Well, we're talking about a company that has obviously proven itself over the past 44 years. More or less,
More
okay,
or less, yeah.
a little less than that actually, off in my count. But most recently, they more or less lost the war when different companies took over the mobile arena, so to speak. They were very early on with a smartphone, with a tablet, with different things, but their strategy was off, and so they missed out on the market. Now, Satya Nadella is coming in with a tremendous amount of experience in cloud and mobile technology, and with 22 years of experience at Microsoft specifically, and with Bill Gates on his side, people hope that there will be really a future.
Of this appointment?
Sorry?
Is he really in charge of putting Bill Gates as a technical advisor?
Not really. I mean, the truth is, Bill Gates, along with the board, went looking for someone who would be willing and able to work with him. It was sort of part of the program from the beginning, and various other people who had the option of taking on the role said no thank you very much, because as long as Bill Gates is in the seat, he's there, and he's going to be more or less controlling behind the scenes. And this is one of the reasons why Nadella actually was a safe choice, because he comes from within the company. He doesn't necessarily come from without the company with a fresh approach, but he's dependable. They know what to expect from him.
But can they actually, both of them, take Microsoft to its, let's say, glory days?
We're hoping so, but only time will tell. It's really difficult to say. Nadella does come in with different experience than, say, Ballmer. Steve Ballmer was a dorm buddy, or a roommate, so to speak, a dorm mate, anyways, of Bill Gates from the 70s. Nadella is not a contemporary, so to speak. He was an employee for 22 years. So it's a very different kind of relationship to begin with. The Ballmer-Gates relationship wasn't always so good. The corporation, Microsoft was oftentimes stalled in the early 2000s when Ballmer first came on. So it's really interesting to see where they take it.
You know what they say, when people are always saying, don't mix business with pleasure, they are right. Don't mix business with pleasure.
Indeed.
Benjamin, thank you very much
very welcome.
for this. And of course, we will see you next week.
Absolutely.
And still ahead on this I-24 News Evening Edition. The daily debate, the Israeli separation, wall suffering on one side and security on the other. How necessary is it? And on one-on-one, behind the scenes of some of the most controversial decisions of international law in the Middle East. 2 minutes break, and I'll be back.